Hello, and welcome to the Delivering Innovation podcast series from Perspectiv, in collaboration with the Centre for Creativity in Professional Practice at the Business School of City, University of London, formerly known as CAS. This podcast looks at what it takes to create value from innovation through conversations with practitioners working in a range of roles and sectors to make innovation and change happen. The aim is to share ideas that you can rely on to become more effective. I'm Ian Stromsmoe, and in this episode, Andy Wilkins and I spoke with Ian Forbes, who is the managing partner for the European region of the Artemis Partnership, a growth consultancy that optimises the sales effectiveness of companies selling high-value solutions to customers with complex problems. We explored the topic of delivering innovation through Ian's experience as a strategic bid consultant, helping clients win their most important growth opportunities. Ian talked about the importance of idea generation in innovative organisations with an example from his days in advertising.
You've got to generate idea after idea after idea after idea after idea.
Once again in this podcast, we encountered ugly babies.
Just don't tell people they're babies.
I know, you can't say that. I know.
Doesn't work.
And one final introductory note, because Ian Forbes and I are both Australian and both named Ian, Andy chose to call me Strommy in this episode, which was my high school nickname. Thankfully, it didn't bring back too many painful memories. Hello, Andy.
Good morning, Strommy.
And a very big welcome to our guest today, Ian Forbes. Thank you very much for joining us, Ian.
Hi.
We thought we'd start by asking you to give a brief introduction about your background and what you do as it relates to delivering innovation.
I'd be delighted to. Innovation has been a sort of a touch point through my career. Originally, I'm an advertising guy. Started off running advertising agency, strategy, MD. Went into different areas of professional service, so ex-KPMG, head of risk consulting for London, responsible for helping grow that practice, almost tripling it in under 3 years, and then had stints with EY as a partner with a global built asset consultancy firm called Artemis, has about 35,000 people at last count. And for the last 4 years, I've been managing partner of a group that's represented in the US and Hong Kong, which is called the Artemis Partnership. As the Artemis Partnership, we help teams grow, organic growth. That's either through winning very large contracts or coming up with better strategies to grow their business.
Well, thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to hand over to Andy, and I'll just warn you, his first question is usually a bit of a doozy.
I wouldn't expect anything less from Andy.
Thanks, Strommy, and thanks, Ian, and welcome. This question, I'm not quite sure what a doozy is, but what does delivering innovation, turning ideas into action mean to you?
Look, one of the things that we focus on, as you heard from my introduction, is helping organizations grow and clearly coming up with better ideas for their organization on how they go to market, coming up with ideas for their clients on how they can grow their business. That's really grist to the mill for winning work. But it's more than that. A lot more than that. There's lots of organizations who will come up with ideas. But I think the real essence for innovation for me is helping communicate to your client or within your organization that this will give you a competitive advantage. It's not just about fixing a problem, but it's how you'll be perceived in the market, how you'll be perceived internally if this is an internal sell. And it's also a vehicle to show somebody's passion or energy, commitment, however you want to call it. It's if you're just happy with just doing the same things all the time, but that's not very dynamic. But if you're coming up with innovation, little innovations, big ones, obviously, that will show a different type of person to the audience, whoever that audience is.
When you talk about this idea of communicating, you refer to internal and external.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are you thinking about there? Is this to do with getting ideas through an organization and then getting it into the outside world?
Yeah, look, it's definitely that. If you were an organization that sold a product or a service or a widget or whatever it is, and you came up with an innovative way of delivering that product or service, then of course that needs to be communicated to the marketplace. But I think the innovation that we tend to see a lot more is where a large organization, for example, will have a very complex situation that they need outside advisors to help them with. So it could be building a warship, it could be building a power station, it could be winning a major architecture contract or whatever. They have an issue. And typically those sort of very large contracts have to go out to the market for all sorts of probity reasons. And that will be in the form of some form of RFP, request for proposal, invitation to tender, however you want to call it. And that will outline their issues. And usually it'll give you a structure that you need to answer to. So they say, okay, we have this issue, this is a problem, this is a way you do it. And you'll have lots of people coming up with their approach to solving that problem. They won't necessarily solve the problem in their request for tender response, but they'll outline their approach to how they solve the problem. The actual solving the problem is what they get paid for, so you're not going to give that away in your response. It often will take a great deal of work to work it out anyway. So that reference to how you're going to fix it, and possibly the outcome and how that looks, might be seen as the innovation side of the response. But usually there's another question in here. It says, okay, tell us how you're going to do all these things. But then you'll get to another question that says, and tell us how you'll be innovative, how you'll bring innovation to the process, not just the outcome. And usually that's where a lot of organizations stumble. So if you're an architect, or if you're an engineer or a financial advisor, or whoever the sort of people we work with, typically when you, as an outside advisor helping them respond, you say, so what is your innovative approach? And they'll all look to each other and say, well, we'll come up with a good solution. And they say, well, that's not what they're asking. They're asking, how do you bring innovation to the process, to the mindset, to the way that you're going to do it? And how do we know that whatever you come up with will not only solve the problem, but solve it in an unexpectedly better way? And that's really what we try and focus people's attention on. Innovation is not just solving a problem, because most of the people that we work with, their competitors can all solve a problem, just depends how much time and effort is thrown at it. It's when you've solved a problem, will that give a better than expected competitive advantage to the client, to the end client? Will that make them a power station that generates energy for a lower cost per energy unit? Will it make a building that has an advantage in the marketplace in terms of being able to command a higher rent? Will it provide a more interesting scenario for that end client to work with on how they go to their market? So that's innovation, and how we try and encourage them to think about not just solving a problem, but bringing an additional competitive advantage through solving a problem.
Great, thank you. The intriguing thing to me is this idea that the response to the bid is not, as you say, the actual solution, but it's the approach to how you will do it. And then adding in this kind of extra, which is how you're going to innovate. What are the sort of factors that you find are really helpful or important to help organizations win those bids? How do you do that process of getting that extra va-va-voom?
Yeah, so if you assume that all the people who are bidding for these large contracts are all at a very high level, otherwise they wouldn't be invited to tender. They're all fully capable of responding to the brief. The difference usually comes not in what their solution is going to be, because their solution will just be a process of working through all the variables and coming up with the right combination of build dimensions that sort of solve the problem. The real innovation comes from being able to understand the organization very well. So quite a few people listening to this podcast would be familiar with terms like consultative selling. If you think through the process of consultative selling, we use another term for it because we think it helps illustrate what's really driving this. We call it insight selling. So it's a question of having really strong insights, obviously to the market and to the issue and to what the art of the possible is. But it's also about insights into the organization, what politically or culturally will mesh with their organization. It's insights into the decision-making process, if you like, the politics, the personalities that are involved in that process. And then it's having the innovation to think about how you're going to communicate with these people as effectively as possible. Now, communication could simply be seen as a process of informing, but it's not. Communication, when you're in a bid, is a combination of informing and persuading. So there's lots of ways to be innovative when you're being persuasive. It could be simply a demonstration of a lot more energy, but it's usually a demonstration of very specific insights and being able to understand that because I have this insight into the organization, the politics, the people, the market, the scenarios, what I'm going to do is different. And if that's different in the eyes of a buyer, that will be seen as being innovative. So you could call it rigor, you could call it discipline, but I like to think it's more about innovation. It's about taking an issue and saying, okay, we know this. Now, we could just respond like this, but what if we respond like this, this, and this? Now, that would make an impact on the client.
So the idea that sometimes is out there with the field of innovation is that it's all about the ideas or solutions. So the frame that we think about is that there's needs, then ideas, then solutions, then diffusion, marketing and selling, if you like, and valorization, which is where the client gets value from whatever it is. So the interesting thing to me is you're talking about back to need. Your word was insight. If you can get after and have some genuine insights that's new to the client, then that helps you with your approach to being innovative. Have I kind of got that about right?
You have. The insights that we're thinking about here is understanding the environment in which the decision will be made and to creatively, innovatively leverage those insights to put you in the place where you're seen as the best or obvious partner. You're the best partner because of a cultural fit. You're a best partner because of the way that you understand them so that there'll be less time for them to bring you up to speed. Your insights in terms of what might not work in this scenario so that they will know that they're not being taken down sort of blind paths. Solutions is an interesting way of thinking of this. In my introduction, I said that my original career was in advertising. And the last agency that I had before I moved out of advertising was seen as one of the most creative agencies in Australia and won a lot of awards for doing so. And the creative director I had working with me at the time, globally famous creative director, won huge amounts of awards. He had a very simple thing. He said, ideas are 10 a penny. We hired a lot of very creative people. They were attracted to our agency. And he used to have to whack out of them this idea that they would sit in the room, come back with an idea and say, here's my baby. It's wonderful. It's so creative. It's so innovative. It's so lovely. And he'd go, yeah, that's fine. Give me another 10. And he helped them understand that the process of coming up with an idea, although it's valuable, is not an end in itself. It's part of a process. You've got to generate idea after idea after idea after idea after idea. Eventually, one will bubble up and go, now that's a good idea. That's a really good one. Where the first one was perfectly adequate. And could have been taken to the client, and the client would have said, "Oh, very good job. Yes, here's your money. Thank you for the idea." Whereas he wasn't happy with that. He would keep coming and come back with an idea. Often the idea would be presented to the client, and the client would go, "Oh, I'm not sure about this. That's a bit different. That's wasn't what I was expecting." And there would be a certain job to try and communicate why this was a good idea. Usually at some point after the client was up on a stage accepting awards and accolades for what a genius piece of work this was, they would eventually understand why. But the process of coming up with lots of ideas, lots of innovation, was something that makes the difference between a workmanlike organization and an organization that sets itself very high aspirations.
So there's so many jumping off points here, and I love that idea of the extended effort that you're referring to there, that if you put in the extended effort, the ideas can be developed from being new, useful, and getting up to another level and being very well crafted. I also love the idea that, other people's babies always never quite as attractive as your own, kind of notice. No. So it's a funny old thing. But when you're going,
Andy, just don't tell people their babies.
I know you can't say that. I know
doesn't work.
We've had conversations before about ugly babies as well. So, but I'll leave Ian.
Our last podcast talked about ugly babies, ironically. Yeah.
And just by the way, quick question here. You can give me a rough sense for the audience of when we're talking about big bids. Can you give me just a kind of sense of what sort of value we're talking about?
The work that we get involved in is bids that are going to make a real material difference to the organisation that we're dealing with. So that could be as little as 100,000 or a couple of 100,000 on the small scale. But if you're talking about a very big organisation like a BAE Systems, for example, what is important to them, the numbers become a lot bigger. So I was proud to be the sole external bid advisor on BAE Systems' successful bid to sell 9 anti-submarine frigates or warships to a friendly foreign power that was valued somewhere around $30 billion. And that's a contract that lasts for about 25 years. But it's also structural to the way that country's industry was configured. So it's making a societal difference, not just buying some shiny grey ships that can shoot things. So that's at the top end of the scale. But a lot of the work that we do is in the tens of millions, certainly.
Great. Thanks, Ian. It's good just to get a reference point because for most people, I think, listening, it's a bit mind-bending to think of a sale of 30 billion.
Just an interesting thing on that, just to pull back. When you go out and you buy a bottle of beer or you buy a packet of washing powder, you may think, okay, I'm going to buy this because I'm thirsty or my clothes are dirty. But then you have a whole string of brands sitting at you on the shelf and different formats of washing powder. So what drives your hand to pick up one particular packet over another packet? And often it's not just a rational decision. Every single one of those washing powders will wash your clothes for you. Every single one will get out the stains. So why do you reach for one packet and not the other? The same with beer. What is it because you like the taste, or is it because your friends drink it, because you trust it? Does it remind you of a very good time that you had on holiday or whatever? Now, those drivers for you buying a washing powder and beer are no different to what causes somebody to buy a power station or a warship. Of course, there are rational drivers, but that's not what we're brought in to help people manage. What we help them manage is the environment of emotion and politics, as well as putting a rational story together as rationally and as persuasively as you can. But don't think it's a different thing when you're selling something that's worth a lot of money. The numbers are different, but the thinking process has to be the same, whatever the size of the deal is.
I can see you weaving the advertising experience from a while back with your current work. So that asks the question then, what are those drivers? What have you noticed are things that are different to what people traditionally say? What are those key basis for making a decision from your own research and experience?
It always comes back to people. Typical expression is organizations don't buy, people do. So now you have to work out which people. So you need to understand, we call it the power map. What's the dynamics involved in the decision-making process? Who really cares about the decision? Who will be impacted by it? Who has influence over whom? And that's not always a hierarchy of an org chart. It could be some people who don't even sit in the org chart are influencing. It could be outside suppliers. It could be advisors. It could be quite a junior person who has the ear of a senior person, all these sort of things. So firstly, you work out how the decision is going to be made, on what criteria are the stated criteria, and then by understanding the individuals, what might be their personal criteria. Some of those personal criteria will be stated, and they're often called the rational criteria or rational motivators. It's, does it have the right size, fit, effectiveness, resources, cost, whatever. But there will also be emotional motivators, things like ego or trust or fear or anything else that gives you an emotional tug. There'll be the politics. How am I going to be perceived if this all goes horribly, horribly pear-shaped? And if so, what sort of organization should give me the best sort of air cover for that sort of thing? And then you start thinking, okay, well, if these are some of the factors that are at play, how do I understand them? So we come back to that word I used before, insight. And you can't simply go up to a CEO and say, so tell me what you're really, really scared about. What do you stay awake for worrying about? So you've got to have techniques to ask and understand people's perspectives that are a little more sophisticated than that. And that probing techniques, there's books and books and books written about probing techniques, but there are some frameworks, if you're serious about being persuasive, that you need to understand. And then lastly, it's the context of which those things are being processed by an individual. So let's call it their personality. If you were trying to sell something to a world leader, you'd have to think about different ways of doing it. So I mention a world leader because we're all familiar with world leaders. They have a persona that we can recognize. So if you were trying to sell something to Boris Johnson, it would be a different way that you sold it than if you were trying to sell something to Angela Merkel. That would be a different way of trying to sell to either of those two people than Macron. It would be a very different way of selling to Donald Trump if you ever felt like selling to Donald Trump. So thinking about the personality of a person, how they process information, what's important to them. Are you going to pitch them in a tweet, or are you going to pitch them with yards and yards of statistics and analysis and so on? So think about all those factors. It's not rocket science. It's just a question of being a little bit rigorous.
So if you were, for example, looking at a pie chart of what was influencing how a decision's made, the solution, I'm presuming, is part of that pie chart, the actual proposed solution itself.
It is.
I was curious what the figures end up looking like from your experience, because I would have thought a lot of people might think the solution was like the main thing, right?
Yeah. But this research has been running now for about 15 years. And originally, the research came from an organization that I was working with in Australia. After I left the advertising world, I got into a consultancy that helped people in face-to-face communication, so often persuasive selling, negotiation, that sort of thing. And as part of the work that I did with that organization, I was in a meeting on one occasion, and I said to a chap, we really understand how your people buy. And he was an Australian. And he put his feet on the desk and said, no, you don't. You haven't talked to him. I went, okay, fair call. We should probably go talk to him. So we did a research, ended up being ultimately some 3,000 C-suite buyers, so CFO, CEO, chief marketing officer, that sort of thing, saying, so why do you pick one organisation over another as a partner if you're buying something significant. And over years, that information has evolved, but there's always been consistency, and that's never changed. So at a top level, to fully address your question, the thing that's referred to as the solution, that's the actual thing you do, and the dimensions around the solution, so things like its price, how do you define its quality, the skills that you bring, the CVs that you have, your idea, the innovation component, that variously comes out at a figure under 30%. So the last cut was around 29%. So what does that mean? It means that 71% is everything except your idea, the innovation. And that 29% is referred to as the best solution, combination of you, your organization, and what you bring. So what's the other thing? So one thing is politics, and politics is not the conservative Labor, liberal Labor, Democrat, Republican type of politics. It's how well do you understand the organization that you're selling into? Therefore, how well can I be confident that you won't leave me exposed as a buyer, that you will understand the frustrations or the challenges that I face, and the people I need to communicate within my organization to buy this. So that understanding of the politics in the last cut was around 16%. The next one is often thought of as often very big, bigger than it usually is, actually. It was big and is big in some parts of the world and some industries. And people often refer to it as relationship. We call it chemistry. It's the ability to connect. Not connect personally, but connect professionally so that people have respect for you. And that level of chemistry, again, goes up and down according to what industry you're in. But as an average, it drops out at around a quarter, so 25%. And the largest chunk, if you've been doing the maths, will be 30%. And that's described as understand my situation. So not just know it, but tell them how you know it and basically replay back your insights. Insights into the sector, insights into the market, into their particular company, their issue, their need, their team, and them as an individual. So a whole tier of insights. And somehow you need to not just send them a book that says what we know about you, and if I ever see another document that has the first page what your problem is, I think I'll shoot them. But it's really all about making sure that in the whole communication you're able to show the insights that you've gathered are correct, and because of that, it's shaped your approach and your solution.
One of the things that this brings up is that you're talking about this, you build like a bow wave. The submission of the bid at the end is you're almost suggesting that the organizations on these big bids have almost won it before they get to the final bid because of the relationship and how that's worked through. Is that am I reading that? I know there is some formal work and
it's a lot more than the relationship. The relationship is a trigger to drive insights. There's an error that some people think. I'd call it sort of an old school, I won the business on the golf course analogy type of thing, where relationships trumps everything. Relationships doesn't. On the bigger and more important bids, just because you're a mate with somebody does not mean you'll get the business. In fact, in some instances, you can get a little too close to somebody and that might be a negative for winning a business. But what it does mean is that they will respect you enough to be able to share information with you, give you more subtlety in the information, and that will help you leverage those insights into winning. It's sometimes the case where you have won it before the RFP comes out, and it's just a question of confirming it. In extreme cases, you might get a tender process cancelled and just appointed. I can remember several of those that have happened.
Coming up, Ian reveals how the best-selling book, SPINSelling, was nearly named SPIV-selling until the author took some sage advice.
He said, Ulimes told me SPIV wasn't a good word. I went, yeah, you're pretty right. SPIV isn't such a great word. You probably got good advice.
And we discussed the psychology of winning versus some common perceptions of selling.
Dirty money.
Yeah, dirty money. Dirty commercial.
Stay tuned.
So with this insight that it's over 70% is outside of the solution itself, do you have a challenge in helping organizations to spend more time figuring out these insights into the people and their situation, as opposed to them having a natural desire to rush off and develop the ideas for the solution?
Yeah. And in a nutshell, Andy, you've described why people hire us. Almost always the most senior person in an organization that essentially is a technical organization. So whether it's an accountant or an architectural firm or an engineer or a naval architects or so on, they have tens, hundreds, thousands of employees who are really, really good at solving problems. Okay, that's what they get paid for. That's their job. And they're great at doing that, but they don't often step back and go, all my competitors are also very good at solving a solution. So simply by showing them how clever I am at coming up with a solution is not going to make sure I win. In fact, it's the baseline for why you should be considered. It's not the criteria that will get you across the line. So yeah, that's almost always the issue, that all the technical people will rush in to try and solve the problem and not use their smarts to think about how they have to position themselves as the right partner, and then how they persuade teams that their approach, be it innovative or otherwise, is the right one to be applied to the client's need. So yeah, it's very much about bringing that rigor, a word I used before, early on. When we work with companies who get this and we help them apply it, then they win something like 75% or more of their strategic opportunities. That's of all their strategic opportunities. So if you think about cost of sales and you think about the issues with motivation if you lose, and you think about the general feeling of well-being in an organization, and compare one that loses 75% of the time to one that wins 75% of the time, you could get a sense that this makes a big difference.
So you talked about winning a lot of bids and having a good percentage rate at winning. What's the difference between winning and selling?
Selling is something that most people, particularly in technical industries, tend to run away from a little bit. So even in professional service like Big Four or advisory firms or so on, nobody will ever describe themselves as a salesperson, because that's seen as a little tacky. It's a little foot in the door trying to inflict something on somebody that they don't really need or want. However, on a more professional level, selling is really about the ability to strike up a quite quick rapport with people, the ability to be able to ask useful questions, to understand the situation of the need, and then to be able to package a series of appropriate benefits to the person, ideally resulting in a sale. That tends to be for lower cost transactional issues. So when we're talking about much bigger deals, I'd use a comparison between selling as a little bit like playing checkers with somebody, and winning, which is what we help people do, which is more akin to playing chess with somebody. So there are multiple figures on the board. There are multiple ways these figures move and interact with each other. And you have to not just think about the situation that's across the desk from you, but what would be the third, fourth, and fifth play on this? Where would you be going? What's your route to get there? So winning is more complicated. Winning is a lot more interesting. And it usually means that when you think about the type of organizations that we deal with, professional service people who are, very good at what they do, and they're very smart at how they approach it. You need to engage their smarts to think about winning, not just selling. So we don't encourage our people just to be like salespeople. We encourage our clients to be like chess grandmasters. Think about all the pieces on the board, the competitors, all the scenarios, work through, usually as a group. This is not a single person exercise. Winning is a team exercise. So bring the team together to think about how the team can be engaged in order to see the path through to checkmate. And that's winning. It's different from selling.
It sounds like you still need to know the need, but it's a more complex, strategic and collaborative process.
Correct. And there are different methodologies that people employ to do this, but I'm reminded of one that's called SPINSelling. Now, SPINSelling has its place. It's not the definitive solution for all things, but it does highlight that understanding the situation and the problem is only one part of it. Understanding the implications, the deeper insights, and the end, which is needs payoff. So S, situation, P, problem, I, implications, N, needs payoff. Understanding those last two is all just part of this game of chess. Understanding the power map, how people influence each other, understanding personalities, styles, understanding the politics, all these things. But it just takes rigor. It takes understanding how you think about things and then having a series of skills to allow you to leverage the insights that you've won to turn into a result. We call that a win.
Ian, the needs payoff piece sounds slightly odd or contrived. Needs payoff,
yeah,
slightly odd.
It is.
Is that what it was originally?
No. I had the guy who originally came up with that acronym, now Professor Neil Rackham at Harvard, or emeritus professor, I think. He was a consultant, and I did have the opportunity to talk to him about some of these things. And I made the same point that you had to him, and he said, yes, well, I was going to call it V for value, because that's really what he's trying to get to the bottom of. But he said, you limeys, he's quite American, and he thought I was English. He said, you limeys told me SPIV wasn't a good word. And I went, yeah, you're pretty right. SPIV isn't such a great word. You probably got good advice. But yeah, if you think of it as value, it's probably a better way of getting your head around it.
Yeah, no, thanks. We use the word valorization, which is a kind of similar kind of word. It's to get value from. I often find that with whatever the person's technical sphere is, or their smart area, is that, yeah, it almost like it like dirties them, less pure.
Yes, pure, corrupted with a dirty money.
Yeah, dirty money, dirty commercial. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow,
I mean, you have to think of the personality of people who, if you've gone through school where you were really good at mathematics or whatever, and then you were told, you would be a fantastic engineer, and you've gone to university and you've got a first in engineering, and then you've got a master's in it, and everybody's told you this is a fantastic skill that you have. You wouldn't necessarily like to be thought of, oh, he's a salesman, like the guy at Talk shop who sells me a mobile phone I don't need. So it's cultural, but how people perceive themselves, that's one of the reasons that we get them to move away from thinking about selling and thinking about winning, because winning needs the sort of smarts that they might like to think that they have in spades, being a PhD in mathematics. Okay, you're a smart guy. Now use that to win something. And oh, by the way, that means you've just sold, but we won't talk about that.
Yeah, just shifting the language a little bit can shift the mindset. Yeah. We talk about quite often with innovation and generally being effective, the T of skills as the notion of the vertical part of the T, which is the technical aspects, if you like, and the horizontal part of the T is things to do with like chemistry, people skills, these sort of things. So I'm kind of getting the sense here that what you're saying is the smarts, as you refer to them in these organizations, are kind of naturally want to play in the vertical part. And the opportunity to increase effectiveness is to get them to attend more to those horizontal skills. The question that comes up.
There's a point on that, Andy. Just very quickly, the figures that I gave you before around 29% is a solution, 71% is everything else, doesn't necessarily apply that you should spend 71% of your time on everything else and only 29% on the solution. It may take more time to come up with genius than that. The point that needs to be taken out of this is usually what happens, it's like 5% on those things and 95% on the solution. And I'm just saying, move the dial. Make it not 5, but maybe 15-ish. It depends on the scenario. But you've certainly got to factor in enough time to make a proper impact in these insights.
One of the pieces of data we have from the research with the Product Development Management Association is the more effective organizations in innovation spend 75% more in that front end. 75% more than the less effective organizations.
And their competitors.
Yeah. So it kind of underlines what you're talking about.
Well, you mentioned the original primary research that came up with those numbers, the 29% and the 71%, and insights in particular bids. How do you do that research? How do you gather those insights?
Well, that particular study was a study that originated in Australia, you'll be pleased to hear, Anne. And it was done by a professional research company that had sort of blind questions and a whole series of things that was properly researched. The danger of not structuring this sort of research effectively is that you get the answer back what people think they should say. So why did you buy? Oh, they were the cheapest, or we had the best return to cost ratio, or whatever. And it takes a certain skill to continue asking the right sort of questions or structuring the right sort of questions so it flags up what the issues are and then compare them relative to other things. So that process shouldn't be thought as straightforward. It's not. And when you're doing a debrief, as I said before, we go and do debriefs and we sit across the desk from somebody and say, so help me understand, why did you buy such? And they'll give you the first reason. And you ask some follow-up questions and you then get them to compare the different reasons and highlight, competitors and try and draw a path for them to follow. Because there's a term that everybody would be familiar with where you describe somebody as rationalizing a decision. So, I'm a car guy, as Andy knows, and I will think of a new car to get. And, we have quite a few cars. We don't need another car. And I'll come back and I'll tell my wife that this is a great car to buy because of this reason or that reason. It's an appreciating classic, and it's something that we could use here, or it's better to use there, or whatever. And knowing our industry and knowing me, she'll look at me and she'll say, that's not the real reason, is it? You just think it's really cool to buy this car. I go, yeah, that's pretty much. It's really cool. Well, we should get it. She'll, fair enough then. But as soon as you start rationalizing something, you're trying to step away from these emotions and not recognize them. And clients will do that. And in most cases, they won't be aware that they are doing it. This is a subconscious process. If you get this stuff, you'll recognize that your subconscious is driving this, not your conscious. And then you'll sort of work out, oh, okay, I now need to think about this on different levels, not just a totally rational level.
I love that idea that we all think we're a kind of rational beings and in control, but it's actually the subconscious and the irrational that's really...
Yeah, you only have to look at elections around the world to work that one out.
That's true, yeah. There's a question for me that's popped up. How does Artemis then diffuse itself? Your work is helping others. So I was really curious about, what do you do? Artemis, she's the god of hunting. Is that right?
Yes, the Greek goddess of hunting.
There's obviously a link there. So I was curious, how do you hunt down your prey, inverted commas, and diffuse Artemis?
In terms of our marketing, almost all of it is by referral. We're fortunate enough to work with organizations that are very big. Because of that, There's lots of avenues to refer within those organizations. And fortuitously, our clients often leave one organization and join another, see that there's a similar problem and go, okay, well, these guys helped me in that company. I'll go and ask them to see what they can do in that company. So I've got 3 proposals on my desk. One is from somebody that I used to work for when I was at KPMG. He was my boss at KPMG. He's a global person. He's now chairman of various companies. Another one's from a Formula One organization that I used to work with. I had a stint working in Formula One. And the third one is from a law firm whose marketing director used to work with another company that I had. So usually what we do is we just work our network, and we remind people sometimes if we see them pop up in new places that we're around. But equally we do the normal sort of knowledge sharing exercises with people. So we'll send them insights, we'll send them ideas, make sure that whatever we're sending them is not a marketing piece, it's something that they might find useful.
Gotcha. And I think I saw on your site you're doing some research at the moment, which is another way of keeping in touch with folks.
Exactly.
Right? So looking back, if you were to create 2 lists of things in front of you, one was a list of projects that had been successful that you've been associated with. They were needs met, job done, project won, everybody happy kind of thing. And then there was another list of projects that fizzled out, didn't quite succeed, were less effective than expectations. What do you think accounts for the difference between the 2 lists? If there was maybe 3 things that accounted for the difference between them, what would they be?
I think you can broadly put it as one thing. It's a lack of knowledge. A lack of knowledge of what was the real issues at play, what were the decision criteria, lack of knowledge about competitors, lack of knowledge about your own ability to move the dial, to shift people's mindsets, all those sort of things. And typically, I think most people will recognize this. If something is going to fizzle out, to use your expression, this usually doesn't come as a great surprise at the end. You go, oh my God, it didn't work. Who would have thought? You have a sense, probably fairly early, that this is not going as well as it could, that there is some sort of wave that's pushing back. And why is that? And I suppose if there's a learning from any of this, certainly a learning we try and share with our clients that we coach, is you should be very aware if this feeling is happening. If you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling that you're not on the crest of a wave, but you're trying to swim up from the middle of it, there's probably some reasons for that. So work out what the reasons are. Make a call. Can you change them? Can you call it out? Can you shift something? Or do you walk away? And the better, certainly as a consultant, the better approach is to recognize when you should walk away and say, okay, I've given you my professional opinion, but I think there's a few barriers that's going to stop you. If you can change those barriers, we're happy to talk, but at the moment, I think better if you continue on this particular way. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't have problems in any scenario. There'll always be things that will push you back, but you should be able to see a clear way forward. You should be able to see, okay, with lots of effort, I can get this done. I need to change this mindset. I need to move these people, but you can see a path. If you can't see that path, then move on. And certainly if you look at hindsight with all projects that have worked very well, as opposed to the ones that haven't got a result, then there's certainly that sense with those projects that worked well that people want you to succeed. They want to succeed. They're happy to change and adapt or evolve. And you can see a path to help them do that. And put in the effort, you'll get the result. But life is not perfect. You've got to pick your battles.
So, Ian, you talked about the openness of the client to change and accept the advice. And on the other hand, you've got to have some kind of path that you talked about forward through that. Is there something around I don't know what you would call it, credibility or trust or something in the nature of the relationship between people that's like the antecedent, the prerequisite for that to happen? Because I've seen situations where you can have a great path forward and have an open client, but something doesn't work. There's just some people, I'm not going to follow that far.
And you're right. And I think the issue here, we came back to talking, one of those things in that pie chart we referred to was chemistry. And that was the terminology used by the research group. But I tend to think of chemistry more around professional respect. So having a rapport is one thing, but having a respect is another. And if that credibility or professional respect is not there, then it's difficult to get people to change. The other factor that's at play here is at what level do you have a professional respect? And if you're looking for big change, then you need to have a high up champion to endorse that. Very difficult to drive change from a bottom up. You have to drive it from top down in most cases, which means that if you're trying to drive innovation, to pull it back to this, then you've got to work out at what level will innovation need a champion? And then it's your job to try and find a way to get the respect of that individual or group of people. And you don't have to be friends with them. You've just got to be respected. And then to engage that group in your interests.
Great, thanks. I love the additional point about professional respect. Yeah, thank you. So, Stromsmoe.
Yes. So we're going to end with 3 standard questions that are designed to reveal a bit more about you personally. I think you may have hinted at some of these answers, but please give an answer and then briefly explain the reasoning for your answer. Is that okay, Ian?
That's fine. I'll reserve the right not to answer every question, but yeah, go on.
Okay. So the first question, follow the rules or break the rules?
I'll give you a third answer, bend the rules. If you follow the rules, you won't get a competitive advantage. If you break the rules, you might be tossed out as either too high a risk or not serious enough. But if you can find a way to interpret the rules, bend them, if you like, recalibrate them towards where you should be going, then that in a large corporate context is probably better. There are some rules that you don't break for cultural, political reasons, but if you can refocus those rules to help show a better path, then that might give you a competitive advantage.
Great. Very insightful. Okay, next question. Talk it through with others or think it through on your own?
Always the former. We're great champions of the power of building up ideas and approaches by sounding out other people. They don't always have to be experts in the area. Often people who are fresh to the area will ask the so-called obvious questions that should lead you into a different path. If you keep a very open mind and think everybody has a perspective, that's why I'm a huge fan of diversity not just in the political context, but diversity in mindset as well. Making sure that you've got a variety of people sitting around who come from different backgrounds, experiences, and even levels of energy. You know, these things can make a big difference.
Great. So last question, trust your head or follow your heart?
Interesting one. I think it has to be somewhere in the middle. There's got to be a blend. The more experience people have, I don't think experience necessarily is sort of a holy grail. And just because you've been doing something for 30 years doesn't mean it's necessarily better than somebody who's been doing it for 5. I'm a motorsport fan, and some of the greatest drivers are relative kids who just pop up and are just superb. So experience, however, can give you clues in your heart as to what you might be aware of or areas that you might wish to explore. It's that concept I talked about a little earlier. If you feel like you're under the waves trying to swim up rather than riding a crest of waves. Well, that emotion should tell you, okay, I need to think about this with the head. What is causing this? And then work that through. So I think you should trust your heart to give you the warning signs and engage your head to work out why and what you're going to do about it. You shouldn't trust your heart to decide what you should do.
Okay, yeah. I think there's some parallels as well with your comments about diversity, because it's diversity of head and heart as well.
It is, very much so. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for those answers.
That was great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Stromsmoe, you got anything to add or any other questions?
No, I agree. That's been fantastic. Thank you very much, Ian.
I agree.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Yes, mate. And hopefully we haven't seared your subconscious too much by calling you Stromsmoe.
No, not too many childhood horrors coming back to me.
Yeah.
No,
pleased to hear
fine.
it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ian.
All right, guys.
Ian.
I'll leave you to it. Very kind.
All
Appreciate the opportunity.
And Andy, for the record, a doozy is something remarkable. A corker, a winner, a humdinger. This podcast was brought to you by Perspectiv, in collaboration with the Centre for Creativity in Professional Practice at the Business School, formerly known as CAS. You can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn, or visit us at perspectiv.co.uk. That's Perspectiv with no E. If you liked this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. Thank you for listening, and please join us again.